Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started. We are on our last lecture today, which is the endocrine system. And there are a lot of hormones involved here, lots of things to memorize and remember. So let's get to it. First question here, we are asked to name 3 pairs of antagonistic hormones and state the type of homeostasis they maintain. So we have actually been learning a little bit of hormones as we went along in Unit 3. And one of the first pair of antagonistic hormones that we learned was in the urinary system, right? And at that time, we talked about how aldosterone and ANH work against each other to help maintain the blood sodium level. Okay, and of course, blood sodium level, as you know by now, is related to blood pressure. So, in a sense, the aldosterone and ANH helps maintain normal blood pressure through the regulation of the blood sodium level. Okay, so that's the first pair. Now, we also learned a second pair 2 weeks ago when we learned the bone system. Does anybody know which pair I'm talking about to help regulate calcium level in the blood?
Thyroid?
The thyroid gland secretes one of them, that's correct. And that's a good start. And that one is calcitonin, okay? Calcitonin. And anybody know what the antagonistic hormone is for calcitonin? That's okay. So the other one is PTH, the parathyroid hormone, which will help bring calcium level back up when it's low. Okay, and together they maintain blood calcium level. Okay. Last but not least, we have the insulin and glucagon. Okay, and together they help maintain blood glucose level. Okay, so those are the 3 pairs. And it's good to know which one does what. We will have time to review about it later on today. Next, use the diagram below to describe the structural and functional relationship between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So let's just orient ourselves here. This whole part is the hypothalamus. And this thing that's dangling from it, we have 2 parts here. We have the posterior pituitary. Okay. And we have the anterior pituitary. Now you might wonder, well, how do we know which one is anterior and which one is posterior? Well, you can kind of tell by looking for this thing here. Okay? This is always facing the front of the head, and that actually is the optic chiasma. That's where the optic nerve from the eyeballs cross the middle, right? We learned that in the sensory structure in the last unit. And that's what this little point is. It's located between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. All right. So last time we also talked about how there are 2 groups of neurons in the hypothalamus. One group of neurons will extend their axons into the posterior pituitary gland, like that. Okay, so these neurons are responsible for creating hormones, and you would transport them in vesicles and store them and release it from the posterior pituitary gland. And there are two such hormones. We have the ADH, the anti-diuretic hormone, which helps you conserve water. And the second one that is made in the hypothalamus, but stored and released from the posterior pituitary gland, that is the oxytocin. Oxytocin. Okay, and that's for uterine contraction during labor, as well as for the letdown of the milk during nursing. So that's it. Those are two hormones from the posterior pituitary gland. They are stored and released from the posterior pituitary, but they're actually made in the hypothalamus. Now there is another group of neuron where they stop extending their axon kind of over here. That doesn't go all the way to the anterior pituitary gland, and they will be regulating the anterior pituitary gland through hormones. So there are three hormones that we've learned for such regulation. Okay, so they are GnRH, TRH, and CRH. Okay, so these are all examples of releasing hormones. That's what the RH stands for. I'm just going to move this up here. So these are releasing hormones. Of course, there are inhibiting hormones as well, but we're not going to worry ourselves about them. Okay, so these releasing hormone will travel through the portal system of blood vessels, and it will allow the anterior pituitary gland to secrete various hormones. Okay, so in the anterior pituitary gland, the hormones are separated into two groups. We have what we call the tropic hormones. These are hormones that will target another endocrine gland in the body. And we actually learned two of them from last class already. There is the FSH as well as the LH. Right? You might remember the follicle stimulating hormone as well as the luteinizing hormone, both of which would be released in the presence of GnRH. Now, there are a few other hormones that are considered as tropic. There is the TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, as well as the ACTH, okay, the adrenocorticotropic hormone that targets your adrenal cortex. So each of these hormones will need to have the permission from the hypothalamus before they can be released. So GnRH will trigger the release of FSH and LH. TRH will trigger the release of TSH. And the CRH will trigger the release of ACTH. Okay. Again, these things are explained in details in the lecture recording. I know the second recording had some problems for some people, so I'm going to reteach that part later on today. There are also non-tropic hormones. Non-tropic hormones. Okay, these are things that don't have a specific endocrine target. So growth hormone targets all the bones and muscles and cells of the body to help the person grow. And the other one is prolactin, which is important for milk production. Okay, so oxytocin is to let the milk out. Prolactin is to produce the milk. So that's the relationship between the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. So think of the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary gland as like physically connected, kind of like, connecting, like we used to have like DVD players, right? And you would plug it into the TV through a cable. So that's like a physical connection between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary. There is no physical connection in the sense that there is no neuron going into the anterior pituitary gland from the hypothalamus, but it still is able to exert control like remotely. So kind of like a Wi-Fi connection, if you would, okay? That's the distinction between AP and PP. All right. So next part here is just two diagrams that shows the relationship between the antagonistic hormones that we were talking about. These diagrams are also in the PowerPoint, but we can certainly fill them in together. So this one is for PTH and calcitonin. So in the center, we will have normal blood calcium. And there's always some kind of event that disrupt the homeostasis, right? So in this case, we would have an increase in blood calcium. And that could be caused by, you had a sudden increase in calcium in your diet. Maybe you had a lot of dairy products, or even if you take calcium supplements, right? So that causes the calcium level in the blood to increase, and that will trigger this gland right here to release the calcitonin. So this is the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland. Their thyroid gland is right here. Okay, we'll talk about hyperthyroidism later on, and hypothyroidism, where the thyroid gland gets big. But one of the functions of the thyroid gland is to secrete the hormones to bring down the calcium level. So if your calcium level is increasing, do we secrete PTH or calcitonin from the thyroid? Let's take a moment and think about that. Let me know if you have decided which one is the right hormone. We did a hormone chart for the calcitonin and PTH back in lecture 10, right? So you might want to use that as a reference. Okay, thank you for the input in the chat box. So when there is an increase in calcium, we're going to need to release calcitonin. Okay, that's how I remember it. The IN in the calcitonin reminds me it is released when there is increase in calcium. Okay, you probably want to have a nice summarized sheet of what is being released and what's the trigger and all those things as a reference when you write the final test, okay? So calcitonin is going to act on the bones as well as your kidney. So it will increase calcium deposition in bones. You got all these extra calcium in the blood. So why not put them in the bones? Because your bone needs them anyways, right? So the calcitonin will increase that action, and we will tell the kidney to decrease calcium absorption from filtrate. Right? We don't need to take them back. Just let them stay in the filtrate, and then the body will excrete them, pee them out. Right? So together, these actions will bring the blood calcium level back down. Okay, we learned about how calcium is needed for muscle contraction, right? So if you have too much calcium, it actually could cause you to have uncontrolled muscle spasm, and we don't want that. On the other hand, you might have lower blood calcium level. Okay, that tends to be a problem as we age. We don't supplement enough calcium, and so that goes down, and it will be detected by the parathyroid gland. Parathyroid gland. Now, it's not really clear in this picture where the parathyroid glands are, but they are located behind your thyroid gland, and there will be like 4 little knobs. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and then the 4th one is blocked by this box, but that's a parathyroid gland, and the parathyroid gland will secrete the parathyroid hormone, which is PTH for short. Right, so PTH is going to try to bring your blood calcium level back up by acting on the bone, the kidney, as well as your intestine. So you will increase calcium absorption from bones, filtrates, and intestine. So if you chronically low in calcium from your diet, then the intestine is not a viable source. And you know, there's only so much you can take from the filtrate because the filtrate is from your blood, right? So if you don't have a lot of calcium to begin with in your blood, you're not going to have too much in your filtrate for absorption. So if you chronically have low calcium level in your diet, you will weaken your bone because PTH primarily will be absorbing the calcium from the bone to bring the blood calcium level back to homeostasis. Are we together on this? Any question before we move on to the next set? Okay, I hope this makes sense. Next, we have the insulin and glucagon. Insulin and glucagon. So the homeostasis condition is normal blood glucose. Maybe zoom in a little bit here. Normal blood glucose. And the situation here is to disrupt that, you might have increased blood glucose. Okay, and you know that's something that happens every day after a meal. You don't have to have like sugary stuff in order for blood glucose level to go up, because our diet would have some carbs in it, right? You know, rice, pasta, bread, all these things have carbs in it. These carbohydrates eventually will become glucose in the blood, and that will cause your blood glucose level to go up. Now, this is your pancreas. We learned the location of the pancreas in lecture 8 when we did the digestive system. At that time, we mostly talk about the digestive function of the pancreas, where it secretes, you know, sodium bicarbonate for neutralizing the acid. It secretes pancreatic juices, which contains the enzymes. But in addition to those digestive functions, the pancreas, it's also an endocrine gland. Okay, so exocrine gland secretes through a duct where, you know, the pancreatic juice goes to the duodenum. That's an exocrine function. But endocrine, it would secrete directly into the bloodstream. Okay, so in this case, the pancreas have two types of cells inside. There is the beta cell as well as the alpha cell. So in the case of increased blood glucose level, the beta cells in pancreas will secrete insulin. Okay, so the insulin goes into this box. And again, I help myself remember this because I am in insulin, and that is something that we need to release when there is an increase in blood glucose. Okay. The insulin is going to target two places. It's going to target body cells to take up glucose. Okay. So they will absorb the glucose, which is what they want anyways, because your cells, they need glucose to do cellular respiration, to convert the glucose into ATP, right? But they cannot do it by themselves. They need the insulin there to kind of trigger the uptake. And if you still have excess, then that's going to go to the liver. Okay, so the insulin will cause the liver to converts glucose into glycogen. Excuse me. Glucose, and this is glycogen. That's the storage form of carbohydrate, right? You might remember that from previous semester. So together, these actions will lower blood glucose. All right. On the other hand, if you have a decrease in blood glucose, okay, this time it is going to trigger the alpha cells in pancreas pancreas without the E, I've been spelling it wrong, will release glucagon. Okay, so glucagon goes into this box as well. When the glucose are gone, you need to release the glucagon. And that would act on the liver to convert glycogen into glucose. Okay, that's our reserve, right? So if you skip breakfast and skip lunch today, and now you're a little bit hungry, your body is running on glucose that are being released from the liver. We learned this in digestive system, right? It's called gluconeogenesis, right? Okay, but the hormone glucagon is going to promote that process, and that would lead to an increase in blood glucose level. Okay, so the two things are basically opposite to each other, right? They have antagonistic effect. Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Does anyone have any question before we proceed? Just want to double check with that. All right. Now, since the second part of the video was there are some problems, I don't know what the problem is. When I view it, it looked okay. I viewed it before coming to class. It looked okay, but for some of you, right, it was not working. So I am just going to go through it right now. Okay, so you have this diagram. If you could just grab some like highlighters and maybe coloring pencils, that would be good. The highlighter will help us trace out the path of what hormone targets what gland, and then there are different pathways. Okay, so I'm just gonna give you a moment to get those things, and I'll be right back. Okay, so let's see what is going on here. In this diagram, I don't know why, but for some reason, they decided to not include the hypothalamus. Maybe it was too small, maybe, I don't know why. But there is the hypothalamus right there. We're going to add a line right there, okay? So that's the hypothalamus. Okay, it's so small that we're not even going to color it. Okay. By now, you should know the hypothalamus is going to be regulating the pituitary gland through releasing hormones, right? And we learned 3 types of releasing hormone. There is the GnRH, there is the TRH, and then there's the CRH. Okay, this diagram is definitely something that you want to tape to your wall when you do the final test, okay? Because it's the ultimate reference for where hormones come from and how they interact. If it ends in RH, it's a releasing hormone, and it's from hypothalamus. Now, below it, we have the pituitary gland. This one is facing the right, and the head is facing the right. That means that is the anterior pituitary. Okay. And the anterior pituitary gland has a bunch of hormones, right? A total of 6. I'm just going to give you a moment to see if you remember what they are. And you can write them down yourself, or you can look back if you need to. I'm going to write them down in a second, okay, but I just want you to think about it. It's divided into tropic and non-tropic. Okay. So for the tropic ones, we have follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, as well as adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. Again, they're tropic because they target another gland in the body. As for non-tropic hormone, we have the growth hormone and prolactin for milk production. Okay. So that's the anterior pituitary gland right here. And this would be the posterior pituitary gland. Okay. Posterior pituitary. Okay. Now, posterior pituitary gland does not produce its own hormone. It stores and releases hormones that are produced from the hypothalamus, which included the ADH, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. I'm going to put a star here to remind you these are produced in hypothalamus. Okay, but you should know that by now because I have been saying it like over and over again, right? So that's that. All right, so hopefully you have at least 3 highlighters with you. Okay, so we're going to highlight GnRH. GnRH will trigger the release of FSH and LH in both male and females, right? It's not like a female exclusive thing. Males have follicle stimulating hormone as well. In the female body, FSH stimulate oogenesis, production of egg. In male, it's spermatogenesis, right? Thyroid releasing hormone will cause the anterior pituitary gland to release the thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay. And then the last one, I'm just gonna use orange, I guess. Cortical releasing hormone is going to trigger the release of ACTH. Okay, so they belong to the same pathway. Now, the GH and the PRH, they have their own releasing hormone, but you know, we're not going to talk about it for this lecture. I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if everybody is okay. All right, good. Does anyone know what this is? This thing is tucked in nicely at the back here, at the base of the corpus callosum, if you remember that. And then there is this structure. Anyone want to tell me? Yeah, that is the pineal gland. That's right, Tina. And what does the pineal gland release? There's one hormone here. Pineal gland. That's right. It is melatonin, which helps you sleep, right? Okay. Some people take the melatonin pills, but those are actually not really regulated, apparently. Like if you do search online and read about it, the amount of melatonin in it, it's actually not regulated. So some pills have more fillers than others. And a lot of people say is mostly just placebo effect. In any case, that is the melatonin. It helps you sleep. All right, let's move down here. First of all, we have the thyroid gland here. Right? I keep on saying, don't confuse the thyroid with the thymus. Okay, thymus is like closer to the heart at the bottom. So let's take care of the thymus first. The thymus release thymosin. That was like long time ago, right? When we learned about the lymphocytes, the T cells, and then all those things. The T cells requires the thymosin for maturation. Okay, so how many hormones stem thyroid? Does anybody remember? Anybody watched the video and took good notes? How many hormones stem thyroid? Okay, Noor said 2. Yeah, that's a good number. Mavis said 3. Yes, 3 is correct. Okay, so there's the T3 and the T4, like your text forms. Okay, T3, T4, and then there is the calcitonin. Okay, calcitonin. T3, T4 helps regulate metabolism. Calcitonin helps bring the calcium level back down when you have too much. Okay, so I'm going to take my highlighter again, and hopefully you're doing this with me. The TRH, so the hypothalamus, will trigger the release of TSH from the anterior pituitary gland. So let's pause for a moment and think about what TSH stands for. If you're thinking thyroid stimulating hormone, you would be correct. So as the name implies, the thyroid stimulating hormone will go stimulate the thyroid. And in the presence of TSH, we will release the T3 and the T4. Okay, so this green pathway, and all these things that are highlighted in green, that is responsible for controlling metabolism. Okay, so to increase your metabolism, to lower your metabolism, it is regulated by this particular pathway. It starts in the hypothalamus, and then it triggers the release of TSH, and then the thyroid will release T3 and T4. We'll go into more detail later on, but I just want to highlight them with the same color so that you can see that they belong to the same path, right? So again, like I wasn't joking when I told you to print this out and color code it and use it as a reference sheet for your final test, right? So that you can understand, right? Like this would be quite challenging to do an in-person test, right? Because you have to memorize all these hormones, but it's okay to have a reference sheet for the final test, for the online final test. Okay, that here is my thyroid gland. Just gonna color it a little bit here. And you can't really see it from this perspective, but if we just use our imaginations, if peek at it from the side, you will be able to see a little bit maybe of the parathyroid gland. So remember, they're on the back, right? There are 4 of them. They're kind of piggybacking on the thyroid gland. Okay, so behind it, these little knobs that I just drew, those would be the parathyroid gland. And if there is one easy hormone to remember, it is the hormone from the parathyroid gland. The parathyroid gland secretes the parathyroid hormone. Okay, I'm gonna put a star here for this one. Make sure it's a different color star, right? And then I'm gonna put a star on calcitonin here. Okay, so I guess I'll just put it here. PTH and calcitonin are antagonistic hormones, right? We just reviewed at the beginning of the tutorial. They maintain blood calcium level, right? All right, we are going to continue to move down. Feel free to just interrupt me if you have questions, please. And down here we have the adrenal gland. We first learned about the adrenal gland in the kidney unit. I said it's like a party hat that sits on top of the kidney. We have the outside, which is called the adrenal cortex. And then we have the inside, which is called the adrenal medulla. Think of it as like a watermelon. Okay, the green part, like the skin of the watermelon, that's the cortex. And the meat, the inside, that's the medulla. So I'm going to put it right here, adrenal cortex for the outside. That is going to, this is a little bit more complicated. So, you might need to revisit the PowerPoint slides, but the adrenal cortex secretes two groups of hormone, okay? And the categories is called the mineral corticoids, okay? It's a whole bunch of hormones that help regulate minerals in the body. And the main one that we will learn is aldosterone. Okay. So we already learned about aldosterone in the ROS system, and we know the mineral that it helps regulate its sodium. Okay. So there are other ones that is secreted from the adrenal cortex, but that's the main one. Okay. And then there is also another one called the glucocorticoids. Okay, and the main one here is something called cortisol. You probably have heard of cortisone, which is the active ingredient in things like acne cream, in inflammatory ointments, right? Those are similar to this. So generally, the adrenal cortex is responsible for like long-term stress hormone. Okay, I realize I am totally taking up the space for the medulla. I'm just going to put it right here with another label. Okay, so the adrenal medulla, that is more for like immediate stress, fight or flight, right? Fight or flight, right? Your sympathetic system, right? We learned about that. And there are two hormones that does that. There is the epinephrine. Epinephrine is just another name for adrenaline. Okay, it's the exact same thing, okay? And then there is one that is related to epinephrine with overlapping function. It's called norepinephrine, okay, or noradrenaline. Okay, I don't have space. I'm not going to put it. Okay, so like long-term stress, we're talking about like maybe chronic illness, maybe stress from work, stress from school, then your body will release these mineral corticoids and glucocorticoids. Their function is to help increase resources availability in the body. Whereas if it's an immediate threat, fight or flight, or excitement, the pounding heart feeling that you get when you're in a dangerous situation or just like a scary situation, that is released from the adrenal medulla. And it is the epinephrine and the norepinephrine that's responsible for that, for those feelings. Okay. So if you have your highlighters, I am going to take out my orange again. And in this case, we have another pathway. We have the CRH, which would trigger the release of ACTH, which would then go and trigger the release of like cortisol and aldosterone. Okay, so this pathway is related to stress. Okay, long-term stress. All right. Moving on, we have this this thing right here. You probably recognize that is the pancreas. And the pancreas has the alpha cells and the beta cells, which is responsible for secreting insulin when you have high glucose and glucagon when you have low glucose. And you probably guessed it. I am going to put a star next to these guys, right? I'm just going to write here since we have space. These are antagonistic hormones that help maintain blood glucose level. Right? Next, we have the ovaries. Ovary, just one of them here. And that, of course, will secrete estrogen during the first half of the cycle, right? The follicular phase, and it will be releasing the progesterone during the luteal phase, second half. We have the testicle here, testis, we can say, and that releases the testosterone. All right, and that leaves us with one color left, right? The GnRH, the FSH-LH, which would then travel to either the ovaries in the female or the testis in male to trigger the release of these sex hormones. Okay, and just for completion, the yellow ones, that's basically the reproductive system. Reproductive system. So there you have it. It's a really important diagram in the sense that it tells you where things come from, where they're released from, and sort of some of the simple relationship between the various hormones. Okay. Seriously, any question? Okay. By the way, you guys probably have received an invitation to do the survey for the course. Please do take a moment and do that, and tell me how I can improve the course. That's very important. Like in the comment section, right? Tell me some of the things that that you wished you had seen in the course that would make it more effective, particularly for online teaching. Because I'll be doing this again next semester, and I would love to hear some suggestions on how to make it easier for you guys, and not easier in the sense that the test is easier, but like easier for you to learn, that kind of things. So any comments would be appreciated. All right, so these three pathways, the metabolism, the stress, and the reproductive system, the one that we highlighted, these are called HPA. Okay, HPA. And we're gonna go into more details about the HPA right now. Okay, so just gonna go back up here. Complete the following table related to the hypothalamic pituitary axis. That's what HPA stands for. So these are pathways that have multiple glands involved, and they have feedback mechanisms to help regulate the hormone level. So let's start with the reproductive system. And it's probably easier if we start with, the female ones, the one that we've spent quite a bit of time talking about. So the reproductive system. At the beginning, if you think about what we learned in the reproductive system, at the beginning of the cycle, which is marked by the shedding of the endometrium, right? The menses, right? The blood flow. That is actually caused by a drop in progesterone. The progesterone is what was maintaining the thickness of the endometrium. And so if you have a drop in progesterone, the thickness, all these new blood vessels that was formed will no longer be sustained, and then it sheds, and that's why there is the blood. And so for the first box here, we're going to put low progesterone. Okay, now you might also remember the progesterone has a negative feedback on the hypothalamus. Okay, high progesterone means you will shut down the release of GnRH, you will shut down the release of FSH and LH. I keep on saying, you already have an egg in the fallopian tube. There is no reason to release another egg. There is no need to develop another egg, right? So that's why the progesterone will shut down GnRH release as well as LH and FSH. However, at the beginning of the cycle, if progesterone drops, that will trigger, so low progesterone triggers the hypothalamus to secrete GnRH. Okay. High progesterone means low GnRH. And now if we have low progesterone, that means we will have high GnRH. So GnRH triggers the anterior pituitary gland to secrete what hormone? So look at the thing that we just labeled, the diagram. GnRH. What is going to be released from AP following the GnRH? That's right, Tina. The FSH as well as LH, right? So the FSH and the LH will travel through the bloodstream and go target the ovaries. The ovaries. And under the influence of FSH and LH, the ovaries will secrete estrogen. And later on in the cycle, progesterone, right? Progesterone. And just to make it clear, this is the follicular phase. And this is the luteal phase. And both estrogen and progesterone will result in the thickening of endometrium, right? Of endometrium. Sorry. Oops. So the difference between estrogen and progesterone is that the give me a second here. The estrogen will go back and it will have positive feedback, right? It will cause more of these things to be released. But on the other hand, for the progesterone, it will go back here and have negative feedback, right? Negative feedback. All right. So that's something that we know already. Nothing is new. But we're going to use it as a template to help us, write out the other two HPA. Okay. For metabolism, initially, right, rather than having low progesterone, we're going to have low metabolism. And the reason we have low metabolism is because we have low T3, T4. These are the thyroid hormones that helps regulate metabolism. Low T3 and T4 triggers the hypothalamus to secrete thyroid releasing hormone, or TRH. Okay, we know it's from the hypothalamus because it ends in RH, it ends in releasing hormone, right? The thyroid releasing hormone triggers the anterior pituitary gland to secrete. And again, let's pause for a moment and think about what hormone it is. Okay. What does TRH allow the anterior pituitary gland to release? Look at the diagram that we drew together and try to find the answer. Thank you, Lorena. That is correct. The TSH. And Mohammed as well. Thank you. Thyroid stimulating hormone. The thyroid stimulating hormone, as the name implies, will go target the thyroid gland, causing it to secrete T3 and T4. Now, calcitonin has nothing to do with this, okay? Calcitonin, it's just like another thing for calcium balance, okay? This is talking about metabolism alone. So the TSH will have no effect on calcitonin level. It's just going to target a T3 and T4. And the results, right? T3 and T4 results in increase in metabolism. Okay, and then the T3 and the T4, sorry, I'll let you copy that down first. And then just like the reproductive system, we want to slow down the production of T3, T4 now that we have an adequate level. We don't want to keep on secreting it, otherwise we would have too much metabolism, right? And so the T3 and the T4 will go back and we will have the negative feedback. Okay. So I'm gonna just put this in a series of events to help you understand it, because some people find it hard to visualize. I'm just gonna do it down here. All right. So in the beginning, where we said there's low T3, T4. Okay. Low T3, T4 means we have low metabolism. Okay. So that would cause you to increase TRH from the hypothalamus. I know it's hypothalamus because it ends in RH, a releasing hormone, right? That will tell the AP, the anterior pituitary gland, to increase thyroid stimulating hormone. This will travel to your thyroid gland and cause you to increase T3 and T4. Increase in T3 and T4 will increase metabolism. Okay, now this next part, try to follow, okay? Just listen first. If you increase metabolism, that is caused by increase in T3 and T4. Look at what happens here. The T3, T4 will go back to the hypothalamus as well as the anterior pituitary to shut down, at least to lower, okay, not necessarily completely shut down, but to lower the release of TRH and TSH, right? So we would have, the next step here is you will decrease TRH, which leads to decrease in TSH. Now, why would you want to do that? Because you already have enough T3 and T4 at the moment, right? You don't need to make more, right? Think about the furnace, right? If you already reach your desired temperature of, say, 22 degrees, no need to keep on turning on the furnace to keep heating up the temperature, right? Okay, you need to shut it down. So after you have the homeostatic level of T3, T4, you need to lower it. So when you lower the TRH, when you lower the TSH, then you would lower the T3, T4, right? So when the T3, T4 goes back down, right, to like a level that's too low, then the whole thing begins again. Okay. In terms of like, again, the furnace is like this. Temperature goes down, right? You turn on the heat, right? So after you turn on the heat, then you will bring the temperature back up. Bringing the temperature back up will shut down the furnace. But after you shut down the furnace, the temperature will eventually drop. But once it drops below the preset level, you will have to turn on the furnace again. And then the whole thing just repeats itself. Except we're not talking about temperature here. We're talking about metabolism, metabolic rate. Is that okay? You have to understand this relationship before we talk about the hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism. Any questions? Hey, stress. In this case, we have the beginning again, and we would have low cortisol. Okay, we're just going to focus on the cortisol here. That's the main one that's involved. So low cortisol will trigger the hypothalamus to secrete CRH. CRH triggers the anterior pituitary gland to release ACTH. You can just look at the highlighter that we did for the previous diagram. And the ACTH will target the adrenal cortex. Right? That's what the AC is referring to, right? The adrenocorticotropic hormone. It's talking about the adrenal cortex. And adrenal cortex will secrete two groups of hormones, right? The mineralocorticoids, such as aldosterone, or the glucocorticoid, such as cortisol. And we are using the cortisol as an example here. So generally, the cortisol will increase resource availability. It's resource demanding to remain stressed out. Right? You're going to burn more glucose, you're going to burn more fuel, and you want the cortisol basically make sure that you have that resources. Okay, so typically speaking, the cortisol is going to regulate itself like that. Okay. Usually the cortisol level, it's a little bit higher in the morning just because you haven't been eating all night while you were sleeping. So, you have lower resources throughout the night in the morning. So cortisol level, it's a little bit higher, but it's self-regulating. It should bring it back down just like the TRH and the reproductive system. Okay, but here is an extra thing that we have to consider. And I mentioned this in the lecture, but let's go through it again. So let's say this is cortisol level. Cortisol level. This is just time. Right, so normally it would regulate itself, right? It goes up and down through its own negative feedback inhibition. However, if you are chronically stressed, and it could be due to a number of reasons, okay? Again, like school, work, health issues, right? So if you have chronic stress, okay, when someone is under chronic stress, the central nervous system will go and inhibit the negative feedback. In other words, double negative makes it positive, right? So when you are chronically stressed, okay, like you introduce chronic stress here, then rather than self-regulating, the cortisol level will continue to climb because of this, because of the turning off of the negative feedback. Okay, so you remove the brakes, so to speak, right? These are the brakes, right? So if you inhibit the brakes, then it's just going to keep on rising and rising, right? Until it reaches a new level. Okay, and then it's just going to stay there for some time. Okay, so this is a chronic elevated cortisol level. Okay, and that's not necessarily a good thing, right? Because then now you are using resources to maintain that stressful state, Right? So if you don't have enough glucose, you will start burning proteins, and your muscles, you know, it's proteins. So the person might experience weight loss. The proteins could have been used for, say, your antibodies for your immune system. Now they're being used as fuels instead. So the person might experience a compromised immune system. They might get sick more easily, right? And it's not good for your heart, and it's not good for your memory and all that stuff. And that's what this is. So until that chronic stress is managed, okay, it will stay up here. Okay, but once you remove the chronic stress, it will go back down to normal. Does that make sense? So those are the three pathways for the HPA. All right, we're just gonna keep going here with this diagram. It's more of the same thing, right? Part of the goal here for this tutorial is to see if I repeat it enough times, maybe you will remember it by the end of the lecture, right? But we'll see. Okay, so let's see. This thing right here, that's our master gland, hypothalamus. Now look at this knob thing here, right? This thing, again, is the optic chiasma. If the optic chiasma, where the optic nerve crosses the middle, if the optic chiasma is to the right this time, does that make this the AP or the PP? What do you think? Is this the anterior or the posterior pituitary gland? This guy right here. What do you think? Yes, we have several people saying this is the anterior. That's right. Okay, and generally speaking, in the diagram, anterior is usually bigger looking, okay, because it has more hormones to produce, right? So this is our AP, and the thing behind here, that's the PP. Okay, as you should know by now, that the hypothalamus will be influencing the AP through releasing hormones. Okay? So I'm just gonna pause again for like a couple seconds for you to recall what the releasing hormones are. There are 3 of them. Let's see if we can just recall it from your memory, right? Hypothalamus. Okay. Now, if you are thinking about GnRH, TRH, and CRH, you would be correct. Okay. And so the anterior pituitary gland will secrete 6 hormones, 4 tropic, 2 non-tropic. Non-tropic has no specific gland targets, okay? They are not part of the HPA. So let's do those first. What hormone will affect bones and muscle? Which hormones helps your bone and muscle get bigger, right? That's correct, Tina. That is the growth hormone, GH. If you have too much growth hormone, then the person will have gigantism, too big. Okay, not enough growth hormone, dwarfism. We want to have just the right amount. What's the hormone that targets the mammillary gland for milk production? Okay. Prolactin, that's right. Lactation, right? That's mean producing milk. So prolactin is responsible for lactation. PRL. Don't confuse PRL with oxytocin. Oxytocin comes from the posterior pituitary, which helps the milk comes out. Okay, to make the milk, we need to have the PRL. Okay, so these ones are the non-tropic one, okay? Non-tropic. Non-tropic. The tropic ones, okay? For the testis and the ovaries, we should know by now it is the FSH and the LH. For the thyroid gland, the thyroid releasing hormone will release the thyroid stimulating hormone, right? Which would then act on the thyroid. And finally, we have the ACTH. So these four, these are the tropic ones. Tropic. Okay, you probably are sick of me saying this already, but let's do it. FSH and LH will cause the testes and the ovaries to release things like testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, right? What about the thyroid? TSH will cause the thyroid gland to release. Let's think about that for a moment. See if you remember without looking. Hopefully you're thinking T3 and T4, the text forms, right? I keep on saying. And then the ACTH will act on the adrenal cortex, just the outside, which is responsible for long-term stress. And you know, just to reiterate, there is the mineral corticoid, right, such as aldosterone. And then there is the glucocorticoid, such as cortisol. One for conserving mineral, the other for conserving resources such as glucose. Okay, so I feel like these are things that you can do over and over again when you're studying to help you remember it. Put them on flashcards and whatnot. So name the hormone that best fit each of the following descriptions. Basal metabolic hormone, that would be T3 and T4. They regulate your metabolism. Essential for T cell maturation. That's the thymosin from the thymus. Okay, let's think about the next one because people always get confused between these two things. Most important hormone regulating the amount of calcium circulating in the blood, released when blood calcium level drops. Okay, when you have low blood calcium level, what hormone do we need? Is it calcitonin or is it PTH? PTH is correct. Okay. Helps to protect the body during long-term stressful situation. Long-term stress, we need cortisol and aldosterone as well. Short-term stress hormone aids in fight or flight response, increases blood pressure and heart rate. That would be the epinephrine from the adrenal medulla. These are from adrenal cortex. F, necessary if glucose is to be taken up by body cells. That would be insulin from the beta cells in the pancreas. 4 tropic hormones released from anterior pituitary gland. Again, I've been repeating it all class. Going to give you a moment to fill it in, and then I'll tell you what it is. Hopefully you have the FSH and LH, as well as TSH and ACTH. Next one. Acts antagonistically to insulin produced by the same endocrine gland, produced by pancreas, essentially. That would be the glucagon. Glucagon. Hypothalamic hormone, important in regulating water balance. That would be the antidiuretic hormone, ADH. Anterior pituitary hormone that regulate the ovarian cycle. Because it's from anterior pituitary gland, we know the question is talking about FSH and LH. Directly regulate the menstrual uterine cycle, as in like affecting the endometrium. That would be the estrogen and progesterone. Adrenal cortex hormone involved in regulating salt levels in body fluids. That would be the aldosterone. Necessary for milk production and letdown. So for milk production is going to be the prolactin. And for letdown, it is going to be the oxytocin. Okay. Let's keep going. List the hormones produced by each gland. I'm gonna let you do this on your own because you can just go back to this diagram, right? And figure it out yourself. There's no point of me doing it and then you copying again. It's better if you when you're studying to fill this in on your own and then just check back on the diagram to see if you got it right. Okay, and then do this one, which is backwards. This tells you the hormones, and then you have to tell me where they are released from. Okay. Complete the following chart for TRH, TSH, and T3, T4. All right, let's do this. So thyroid releasing hormone, the location of secretion would be the hypothalamus. How do I know that? Because it ends in RH. Stimulus. What triggers the release of TRH? Well, we have two things here. Low metabolism, which really is low T3 and T4. What does it do? Thyroid releasing hormone will increase TSH from anterior pituitary gland. So now that we have the TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, what's going to happen? First, location of secretion. Well, I just told you TSH is from AP, so this is going to be from AP, right? Anterior pituitary gland. And the stimulus, the trigger for releasing TSH would be increase in TRH. And the next thing would be to increase T3 and T4 from thyroid. Okay, so T3 and T4. The location of secretion, thyroid. Right. Thyroid gland secretes T3, T4, and calcitonin, but in this case, it's T3, T4 that we're talking about. What does T3, T4? What's the stimulus, right? What's the trigger for T3, T4? It will be increase in TSH. And the effects of T3, T4 would be to increase your metabolism. And at the same time, through negative feedback, it will decrease TRH, decrease TSH. Through negative feedback. Okay, so that's the pathway for metabolism. We wrote it down already, right? With the HPA. This is just another way to represent the same thing. All right, next one. Complete the following chart for CRH, ACTH, and cortisol. Very similar situation here. We have the corticotropin releasing hormone. Because it's a releasing hormone, I know it is from hypothalamus. And the stimulus would be low cortisol, right? Low resource availability. And the effects on target would be to increase ACTH from AP. Okay, so next hormone, ACTH. Where is it from? Well, I just told you. It's from AP. And the stimulus is basically the previous hormone, right? So increase in CRH. It will increase the cortisol released from adrenal cortex. It will also increase aldosterone from adrenal cortex. So aldosterone can be released as a result of this pathway, or aldosterone can be released as a result of the RAS that we learned in the kidney unit. So what's going on with the cortisol? The location of secretion is adrenal cortex. The trigger is the previous hormone here, increase in ACTH. And we will have increased resource availability. Okay. If you are not chronically stressed, it should decrease CRH and ACTH through negative feedback. Okay. And of course, we're going to put a star here. The central nervous system can override this feedback during long-term stress. Okay. That's it. Next, we have insulin and glucagon. I don't think I'm going to do this one because you can just go back to this flow chart and fill it in yourself, right? All the information is here already, so I don't want to repeat too much. Okay, let's see. These two are pretty straightforward. Let's take a look at the application question here. Jamie has hypothyroidism. His doctor ruled out iodine deficiency as the cause. The doctor ordered a blood test for T3, T4, TSH. Explain how the results will be different if the problem arises from the hypothalamus and pituitary or the thyroid gland. Justify your answer. So let's talk about what happens during the hypothyroidism. Okay, I guess I'll just do it down here. Okay. So hypothyroidism. Okay, so I am just gonna put our usual stuff here first, the 3 glands. Okay, so we have the hypothalamus. We have the AP, we have the thyroid. Okay. So hypothyroidism means low T3 and T4, right? Low T3 and T4. So just to reiterate, normally what happens is hypothalamus would secrete the TRH, which then cause the AP to secrete TSH, which would then cause the thyroid gland to secrete T3 and T4. Okay. So what could be the problem? Well, if the problem is in the hypothalamus, okay, then you will expect to have low TRH because the hypothalamus is having a problem. It's not making the TRH, which leads to low TSH, which then leads to low T3 and T4. So that's hypothalamic problem. Make sense? Yeah. Low TRH leads to low TSH, which leads to low T3, T4. If it's the anterior pituitary problem, we would have we would have high TRH. Okay, because look, hypothyroidism means low T3, T4, right? Low T3, T4 will trigger the hypothalamus to release TRH. Since the hypothalamus is not having any problem, it will secrete high TRH. But then the problem is in the AP. So despite having high TRH, you will continue to have low TSH, which means you will have low T3, T4. Okay. If the problem is the thyroid, okay, then you will have low T3, T4, which triggers the hypothalamus to produce high TRH, which then cause the AP to have high TSH. But despite having high TSH level, the thyroid is not responding. There's some kind of thyroid problem here, whatever the case is, okay? And it's not able to produce the T3, T4. Okay, so depending on where the problem occurs, the blood test will show different results for the various levels of the hormones involved in this particular pathway. I think I might have a poll question here. Do I have a poll question here? Not today. We'll do it in the review. Okay. I thought I had a poll question with the thyroid stuff. Maybe next time. Okay. Pitocin is a synthetic version of the hormone oxytocin. A woman in the final week of pregnancy who is given an injection of Pitocin, what is the expected outcome? Well, basically, oxytocin is going to induce labor. Okay, and the thing about this is you only have to give a little bit of this synthetic version, and that would kind of start the ball rolling, right? It would trigger the uterus to contract, but as soon as the uterus start contracting, that would send signal back to the hypothalamus to tell the posterior pituitary gland to release oxytocin, right? And as soon as you start producing your own natural oxytocin, then it's just going to have a positive feedback to keep making more and more and more, which resulting in more and more contraction. More contraction results in more oxytocin, which again leads to more contraction. So that's a positive feedback, right? Until the baby comes out. Right? So you don't have to keep on giving the Pitocin. You just have to give a little bit at the beginning to keep it at a steady level, and then your body's own natural version will take over and help with the labor process. Does that make sense? Okay, that is it. That's basically the whole course. I will try to make the last test like very straightforward for you guys. You made it this far. I'm not gonna make it too difficult. And hopefully you'll be able to get the 5% from the lab quiz. Those tend to be quite easy. And then we will have a review on Tuesday. okay, before you take the final test on Thursday. Okay, thanks again for coming, and I'll see you all Tuesday at 12:30. Have a good week, guys. Bye for now.